What's up? It's Cody from the Keepers of Nerdom. How y'all doing today? It is a wonderful Sunday morning, and just doing a little bit of driving this morning. Thought it'd be a good morning to do some semi-random nerdy musings, but focused on Star Trek and the Orville. Rather appropriate. I've finally gotten to see several Star Trek shows on Paramount Plus. We haven't gotten to finish everything, but it's been really cool. Also, let's talk about the Orville as well. So just keep in mind this will be spoilers. And yeah, first off, let's talk about Orville. The latest episode was time travel. And I'm usually really nervous about time travel, but they actually handled it in a really, really good way. In a really moving way, actually, where they focus in on we didn't go back far enough because we didn't have enough energy. And so what we're going to see is what could have been with the person that accidentally got sent back in time, and then they end up actually going back even further and just rescuing him at the beginning. But they say something that really explains it away, that time is still in flux and hasn't been concreted down yet, which they never give a timeline for when that fully happens. That's the only thing that I'm like, question mark. But it's a really, really good concept, and it shows a terrible, terrible choice that they have to make, and the repercussions of time travel, and if you get stuck there. We also get to see Isaac, the actor for Isaac, once again, and it's always clever when they go, hey, yeah, we have to hide him, so we're going to use a hologram generator, so you get to see the actor, which I'm sure for him is kind of nice to just be, rather than have to always be in the makeup, you know what I mean? So it's really good. His interactions with the new crew member are a lot of fun because there's a tough, like, the writers and like Seth MacFarlane really understood this season. They wanted to go into more serious storytelling, and they've done such a good job of that, where there's crew dynamics and anger, and it's so interesting because it's in contrast to Star Trek as well. Now, we watched, me and my kids, we got to watch Star Trek Prodigy, and overall I actually really enjoyed that for a kid's show. It was really good, but yet it had stuff for Star Trek fans. You know, it was definitely what some would term the member berries of just being very much about a lot of nostalgia. And honestly, though, that was okay, because it fit into the core concepts of Star Trek. The only thing I would say is, why do modern Star Trek ships all have windows? It's silly. It's not needed, but in our modern thought process, we need windows on everything, so whatever. But the ship in Prodigy, the Protostar, is really, really cool. I really enjoy the concept of it. The crew are a lot of fun. Honestly, my favorite person is the rock monster, I guess, little girl thing? I don't know. It's kind of interesting. She's just a lot of fun because she's very young compared to everybody else, and then they gave her an arc where they can speed her up. I hope the show gets a second season, but I need to go look and see, because it was fun, and it left off of the end of, okay, we have a conclusion for this part of the show, but now we may actually get to see Catherine Janeway again, you know, because there's a hologram in it, but then they finally show her, and we haven't seen anything from her, you know, other than like Star Trek Nemesis. She shows up for a second, but I want to see more of them. I want to see interactions here. I want to see this happier story, and like, that's the thing I think I love the most about Star Trek Prodigy, that the hologram shows up, and she's explaining to these kids what it is to be Starfleet, and it's counterimposed from the craziness that the bad guys in the show are saying about Starfleet, and it still makes you wonder, like, what happened? Something went really wrong, and I'm not sure. But that's the beauty of it, and yet it's not yet. It really is. It's positive. It's good. It's awesome. Because it's Starfleet of old. It's TNG and Voyager and even some of Deep Space Nine in there. You know, it's got dark in it, but it's also Starfleet is the good. So, if you haven't seen Star Trek Prodigy, I highly recommend it. It's a kid's show, so it's good, it's fine. As far as for all ages, basically, it's a blast. Now, we've watched a little bit of Lower Decks. I haven't gotten to see very much of that, so I can't really speak too much on it. But we've been watching through Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and the biggest positive I can say is, and me and my wife were talking about this feels more like Star Trek than most of Star Trek has. You know, that's why, like, I think Star Trek Prodigy worked pretty stinking well, is it was more like Star Trek than it has been in a while. And Strange New Worlds is a return to form in many ways. But there's small things when you're paying attention, because if you really love Star Trek, you pay attention really hardcore, that if you pay attention to this, it's got some weird issues. And it's more small because they are returning to form. And I love it whenever they take concepts and update them, right? So example, they have the spacesuits from the original series in this show, but they've updated them to look more modern. And so they still have that big red spot on the front of the suit, but they've updated it so it doesn't just look like it's from the 60s, 70s with wire mesh across their face, right? It's an actual suit. It looks good, and that's smart stuff. That's good updates. You know, those are the things that you do. If you're going to have it, just do slight changes to things over time, and people will come to accept it. You know, that's the smart thing. Because I even think about the makeup of the Klingons. You know, when they finally got their ridges and stuff. Because some of them at the very beginning, when they got the ridges, were very, very subtle. And so sometimes you were like, whoa! But then there was also ones that, like, was it Commander Chang in, like, movie 5 or 6 of the original series? Like, it's not very pronounced. And so granted, the movie budget thing, all of a sudden we've got Klingons with ridges. Okay, so it is a jump right away. But it's something that it was the one big change, I guess, in some ways. You know what I mean? And the other change that they explained away of the Enterprise being refit was it was being refit. So it's a change that makes sense. The Klingon ridges don't make sense, at least, you know, in that initial time frame. But it's stuff that you have to do over time to go, hey, we actually have money now. It's smart. You know, I will say, like, the big changes where they do things to the Andorians and stuff, where they make them so ridiculously crazy. Ugh. Okay, that's one thing. Strange New Worlds does this, because the new aesthetic for Andorians is butt ugly, right? That's their whole thing, is we're going to give them even more ridges on their face, and they're going to be just, like, ugly, because if memory serves, the ANR that we saw in Enterprise, the young girl and a few of the others, they don't look like that. It's an update. So, I mean, I can't complain like crazy, but it's still, they look terrible. It's just interesting. But Anson Mount, great actor. Ethan Peck, who plays Spock, there are moments where I find he's spot on. But what really gets me is sometimes it's not that it's his fault. It's the show. Like, there's a moment where he just laughs for no good reason. There's moments where he screams and he reacts emotionally. And you go, I get that there's massive amounts of pain, but everything we saw in the original series and movies was that when this happened, it was because of mind control, it was because of certain things. Now, granted, the very first few episodes, he was smiling and doing things because they hadn't nailed down the character, okay? So you have to be a little bit more gracious in that, because the show hadn't figured out even what it was yet. But this is like, it knows what this character is. Now, granted, this is Spock earlier on in his career, but I think there's just, you got to be careful with it, because Vulcans are very, very important. Why did T'Pol work in Enterprise? She was still extremely logical. She ironically was still very, I guess the best word to use was at times sensual with stuff. And there was moments where they wrote in story reasons why it would make sense, because she was getting exposed to things that would make her almost go crazy in the Expanse, so then she went more nutty, stuff like that. or, you know, Pon farr kind of things. But there's so many moments where they show Vulcans, they don't show anything awkward, but they show Vulcans expressing love to each other as far as, like, kissing and things like that. And that's not supposed to be a thing that from what we've seen in most of Star Trek of, you know, they touch fingers, and in public, that's what they show, and then they've never really showed much past that on purpose because of the concept of what Vulcan is, that they don't do certain things except for whenever their own hormonal drive kicks in at all for anything. It's just interesting to me because they just don't quite understand it, because they want to give us more lovey-dovey scenes and relationship stuff, and it's like, why did Spock work in the original series? Because he was so different, because he stood out. And it doesn't have to be all this love and stuff for the Vulcans concept all the time. You gotta be careful with that, because you're gonna get into too far stuff. And sometimes, like, how they talk around the captain, strange. It's a little strange. And there was a moment too where they said crew person instead of crew member. And it's like, that's the most politically correct statement randomly for no good reason that I've ever heard in my life, because there's no reason for it. Crew member, what's wrong with saying crew member? What's wrong with that? Why do you have to say crew person? What is that? Like, that doesn't help your story. Changing that word to something modern is weird. It's just, I guess that's the thing. Like, this is so much better than Discovery. Okay, just keep that in mind. I am overall very positive about this show. So if you're hearing that, it's like, Anson Mount is just killing it. Like, the episode we just watched with negotiations where Spock and T'Pring switch bodies. Again, more emotion stuff there. But the antics that happened there were a lot of fun. Just of how to do their jobs. But then when Spock punches the guy, it's like, that's pretty illogical. You know, you're into a weird spot. But the thing going on was really, really good. Then we watched the Enterprise get hijacked. That was fascinating and fun. And also just the fact that the Enterprise crew let that happen that easily is kind of interesting. I don't know. It's so fascinating. Like, this show has so much more going for it. But it's hard because Star Trek has been in such a rough spot. It's hard not to be critical just because of how much stuff has happened over the past few shows of Discovery and Picard. And I haven't even seen the second season of Picard because I've heard it's just bad. And like, I've heard people like walk through the storyline and I go, this sounds terrible because it doesn't make any sense. So at some point I want to watch it, but it just doesn't sound good, which is sad to me because it's not that hard. You know, get Rick Berman, get Michael Piller, get the Akutas if they're still alive, have them at least help, and keep this on focus, and get some writers that know science fiction storylines. You know, this is smart stuff. That's all you have to do to really get things going back on. But this is so much better that they finally got things figured out. I will say, as a side note, they finally made a character of Dr. Mbenga fascinating, because they really gave a storyline concept to him that put him in a more focused, he has a personal mission inside of Starfleet. And that's good. Like, it really causes you to focus down in on why you should care about this character. And that's interesting. My concern is we watch some more episodes, because we're like in episode 6, 7. Is that what we're on? Something? Is that they're going to just keep talking about Christopher Pike's upcoming demise. You know, and it's funny because he even goes, I'm going to die. And that's what it sounds like he's implying, and he doesn't understand that, even though he's seen it. And I think he's really meaning that it's just, my life's going to end. But it sounds like sometimes the way he says it, he's just going to die. It's just interesting. But they knew that they had something great with Anson Mount. as Christopher Pike, because he's got the right gravitas for the role to really carry it. The actor they've got for Uhura, I don't connect her to Nichelle Nichols. I don't know. Nurse Chapel, she's fine. The girl up front that's their helmsman all the time, I don't know. She backtalks and says lots of 21st century modern stuff a lot, and it kind of confuses me. But she's okay. You know, the Andorian, Anar, like I said, I enjoy him, but this redesign of the Andorians, there's ugly. Like, give me back the Enterprise Andorians. They were perfect. Their antenna moved too, side note. The other thing that confuses me, okay, this is like little nitpicky things, but it's things that bother me, but also I think they're good questions. This will be the last big thing. So ANR are blind, and then they quickly mention in there that all their other senses are heightened and they have other things, and granted they also have antennas, so there's other stuff, but it does beg the question, how does he interact with touch screens? How does he know what's on them? Do you see what I mean? Like, if your senses, because of the antenna, give you even like a radar sense around you of, okay, here's this button and here's these buttons, and I can see them, you know, through my antenna essentially, but you may not necessarily be able to see colors, well, then you've got a problem, right? But then you have a view screen that can you sense the electromagnetics of what's showing up there? Maybe? I don't know. It just seems kind of weird, because that display is gonna change, and unless the senses are like dialed up to 11 on antenna radar sense that somehow can sense magnetism and then create images out of that in his head, you aren't sensing that. You just aren't sensing it. It's just weird. It's just little stuff like that. I don't know. It's just funny. Just funny. So I love the concept of an ANR being on the ship, but I just have questions that if it was more physical buttons and things, he could be trained to memorize where they are, to know where to go and do, so that would work better. And like on the bridge, like they have a lot of buttons, and I love the little view screen things that they do from the original series. I love it. It's good. Like, they need to do that, and they did. Perfect. And buttons on the bridge, good. Good. That's the stuff. So yeah, I think Star Trek Strange New Worlds is a much better return to form. I think so far Star Trek Prodigy is even more focused in on the original ideals. Although, I don't know, there was an episode with Anson Mount where he really just went into, you know, they were doing diplomatic negotiations, and it was just he's very Starfleet, and it's good to see. It's good. It's almost like they realized what we did earlier was not good, and now we're ready to try to fix it and do better. So yeah, have you seen Star Trek? Have you seen the Orville? Have you seen Star Trek Prodigy, Strange New Worlds? If not, let me know. And if so, let me know, what you find is your favorites there. I'll talk to you later. Bye.